Welcome back to episode 2 of this cryptography crash course. In episode 1, if you missed it, link is down below, we had a general introduction into cryptography. We talked about the history, we talked about the different kinds of fields, we kind of introduced cryptography as a whole, and we talked about different ways how to attack a cryptographic algorithm. Today we're going to talk about the two main types of algorithms we have in cryptography, namely symmetric and asymmetric crypto algorithms. Let's go to the drawing pad and let's work these through and give some examples. So we're going to be starting with symmetric algorithms. We discussed those already as being very straightforward, and most of those we have these so-called substitution ciphers. So basically we have, remember, the encryption and the decryption algorithm, and in symmetric they are the same. They're just the counterparty. In order to paint a simple picture, imagine it this way. Imagine we have a lock, and in order to open this lock, here's the key. This is the encryption mechanism and decryption, and then we have a key, and the key can do both. The key can turn it in either direction. It can turn it into open, and it can turn it into closed. Remember, open is the plain text, the message or X. Closed is the ciphertext. So let's use a very simple example. We have done this before. Imagine we use the encryption and decryption mechanism that was used in the Caesar cipher and in most substitution ciphers, which is just let's move A to B, or let's do a simpler one and say the key K equals 3. Let's just do a bit of a more difficult one. So A equals 3 letters further, so B, C, D. B equals E, C equals F, D equals G, and so on. And so the key in both directions is the same one. So all I have to do now is Alice, I need to give Bob, so this is Alice and Bob, it's not the letters. I need to tell Bob what the key is, and the encryption and decryption mechanism has to be open for everyone to understand. Remember the Kirchhoff principle, we want to have this open. Now, if these, in this case, it's something called a monoalphabetic cipher. Monoalphabetic because we're using the same kind of key for every change. Now, what we could do, because these things are quite easy to crack, and we talked about this, not necessarily because of brute force. In brute force, we would have so many different possibilities. It's quite difficult, but because of frequency analysis. So it would be very easy to kind of back calculate these different types of keys that was used and kind of substitute all the letters backwards. Now, in order to improve this and make it harder to crack, we can use something called Polyalphabetic. And here, the most famous one is the Vignere cipher. And the Vignere cipher was developed in around the 1500th century. And basically what it does, it shifts the entire alphabet over and over again. So what we can do is, as mentioned, A can become D, but B doesn't follow the next one. It goes completely in a complex way. And this is simply done by having different letter rules, so polyalphabetic. And the most famous one is the Enigma machine that was used during the Second World War by the Nazis. But there are always some flaws or always some problems. For example, the Enigma machine had this major flaw that the same letter could not be encrypted to itself. And this was a key concept when this team around Alan Turing, where afterwards the Turing completed Turing machine actually came, the Turing test today, and they cracked this, and it was vital to the success of the Allied forces to conquer or to beat the Nazis during the Second World War. But all of these come down to the same kind of ideas. It comes down to the same way on how encryption works. Now, in these basic things, the cryptography is what's called broken. Broken means you can't use it because cryptanalysis is too easy to be done. But there are still symmetric crypto algorithms today that are being used, but always in conjunction with asymmetric ones. And we're going to be talking about some of those. But I just want to tell you that if someone tells you symmetric cryptography is not used is absolutely not correct. It is used over and over again. And here are the reasons on why. And let's talk about the advantages of symmetric cryptography. And there's 3 of those. The first one is it's very easy to understand. It's straightforward. It's 3 letters this way, 3 letters that way. So to encrypt, the key is the same as decrypt. It's very, very easy to understand. But, and there's another one, it's very easy to compute. And this is something that's really essential, because when we're talking about the asymmetric algorithms, I will actually need to take my phone and do calculations on the phone, because it is very, very difficult, even in my head, to do these basic algorithms, basic calculations. And we're going to use super small numbers, super easy keys. When we actually are going to talk about RSA or Diffie-Hellman or elliptic curve, we're talking about numbers with 60, 70 digits. And this is insane math. And even for a high-speed computer, it takes this computer a little bit to calculate different things. And so an advantage of symmetric is it's very, very easy to calculate. And the other thing is it's very clear if it's broken or not. And this is as weird as it sounds. When we're going to be talking about the asymmetric crypto algorithms, it's not clear sometimes when these things are broken or if they're broken. And there's a lot of rumors and a lot of theories going around that the FBI created those, or the NSA created a lot of those asymmetric algorithms just so they can kind of hack those or understand those, but the rest of the people can't. And so this is very, very straightforward. Now, obviously, every coin has 2 sides. Disadvantages. And we're going to have 3 of those as well. And the very first one is quite straightforward. We need to agree, Alice and Bob need to agree on a key, basically on the shift of letters. Doesn't matter if we're going to use monoalphabetic, polyalphabetic, we always need to meet. Also, the Nazis had to meet to set up the Enigma machine in order to encrypt constantly. And so this need for meeting, or this need for a secure channel in order to exchange the key, it's so difficult, especially in the digital world today. I mean, if I go to a website, I cannot meet with the website provider every single time. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? That's why we have this digital web. So, but in symmetric cryptography, we need to meet. And this is a huge downside. Obviously, the other downside is you can do whatever you want, but there's always the possibility of a frequency analysis. Because the key is a key, the only way how you could actually do it in a way that frequency analysis wouldn't work would be to have a cipher, so a key that is as long as the message itself. And this is really complicated, especially in the way how we need to meet in order to exchange the key, the rule, and the steps. Because if for every message, for everything that I'm sending you, I need to meet again, I could just give you the message in that moment, right? So it just becomes very unpractical, and it's quite straightforward because it is so easy to kind of attack and to break. And the last really huge downside, and this is something that you need to understand here. Let's say Alice is sending a message to Bob, and we have Eve here. Imagine Eve intercepts the message, right? So here's the message, and it goes into the ciphertext Y. Imagine E intercepts that message and gets Y and turns Y into the message, but now changes the message. And let's change the message into N. And now N goes into, give it a different letter, let's say Z. Z arrives at Bob, and Bob decrypts that message, but he doesn't get the original message that Alice sent. Bob gets N. Now here's the problem. Bob never knows that Alice actually wanted to send M, but he receives N because E changed it. And this is a very big problem in symmetric cryptography. You don't have a proof that the original message was actually sent by that person. There's no proof. So because it is symmetric, it's bidirectional. It's both people have the same key to open and close the lock. And this is a very big problem. So the proof of identity is actually missing. And this is essential when it comes to certain decisions, because if the answer is yes, but then a mean or a malicious attacker changes the yes to a no, the receiver never knows because there's no proof that what the original message was supposed to be. And this is something that's very, very relevant. And so what this actually brings us, to this second way of how cryptography works. And that is asymmetric cryptography. And we're gonna do an example right now to kind of walk you through how this works. Here's a couple of things though. There's a lot of math involved, and we're gonna talk about the math in the next third episode. So right now, for some of you, this is gonna be totally confusing. And some of you sit there and you're like, well, modular arithmetic, man, I know this inside out, no problem. You're gonna have an easier time. But we're gonna walk through the math, and I told you already in episode 1, we're gonna go into the nitty-gritty here. This is not some superficial stuff. This is real university level here. And this is what this entire crash course is about. So let's talk about asymmetric cryptography. And here is where it gets really important. The key, and this is very important, the key of encryption does not equal the key of decryption. And that is a very, very big difference, because in symmetric cryptography, the key of encryption equals the key of decryption. For example, in a substitution cipher, let's say it's 3. It's 3 this way, 3 that way. Now, let's talk about asymmetric cryptography, and let's use the same example of the lock. Remember, symmetric, I'm just going to draw it up again so you have it here. We have a lock that has 2 positions. Position A here, and let's call this position closed. And this is position open. And this is position B. Let's just use it this way. And the key can turn it in both directions, right? So, and you need to exchange the key. Now let's talk about the example for asymmetric. And this is again, high level, very, very easy. So we have this point here, and we have this point here. In asymmetric cryptography, we have this third point, and this is just an example of C. And we have closed, open, closed. And now it gets very interesting. We have cryptography for encryption, red, and this key can only turn the lock this way. And then we have a key for decryption. And this lock key can only turn it this way. So here it goes both ways in the symmetric. Here it goes only in one way. And now it gets very interesting. We call the key for decryption, okay, the private key. And we call the key for encryption public key. And now this is why. The key for encryption, I'm going to make public, and it's a number. We're going to say, for our example, that the public key is 5. And this is just a pure example. We are going to say that the encryption method, remember, the method is the same, but it's the keys that are different, right, in asymmetric key cryptography. And we're going to use, and this is now important, we're going to be using mod 14. So we use 2 to the power of the public key, and we're going to do this mod 14. This is modular 14, and we're going to talk briefly about what this means. We're going to go into the main math afterwards, right? So this is going to be what we're actually going to use. So this is an actual example of RSA, Rivest, Shamir, Edelman, asymmetric cryptography. We're going to be discussing this one in very, very detail. Right now, we're just scratching it with super simple numbers, so you see how amazing this actually is, and it's going to blow your mind. But it's going to be very, very interesting. So we have the public key. The public key can only move it in one way. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to put it in a spot. So we open the key in position B, right? It's open, and we put the message in, and we're going to put a message in. And we're going to put this message in here, and then we use the public key and we lock it, and then it's in position C. In order to unlock it, so to decrypt it, we need the private key, but only I have the private key. The public key everyone has and everyone can know. So in this case, the public key is 5. This is just in our example. So the entire world, I'll post it on the internet, I'll post it on my Twitter handle. So you can go on my Twitter handle, for example, Julian Hosp. I post my public key there. So if someone wants to send me an encrypted message, they have my public key there. In Bitcoin or in cryptocurrencies, the public key is actually gets hashed and is then an address. And so that's how it then actually works. And this private key, I'm not going to release to anyone. Only I know it. And here's where the interesting point is. And I'm going to show you the example. What I can also do with the private key, because we also have this position A, I as the private key can put a message into the box and encrypt it with my private key and shift the box into position A here. Now you're going to be thinking, why would you do this? Because anyone who has a public key can now open it again. This is pointless. Yes, but only I was able to actually turn it into this direction. And so what normally then happens, and we're going to do this example, but so I want to show you what actually happens. We're actually going to build 2 boxes with 2 locks. And so what this normally does is, I always sign with my private key and with the public key of the other person. So this is, let's say, Alice wants to send a message to Bob, right? So what she would do is, she would use the private key of person A and Bob's public key. Because then Bob can decrypt the message with his private key, and because the public key of Alice is available to everyone, he knows that it's actually her message. So he can then decrypt the message and verify it comes from Alice. So what normally happens in asymmetric cryptography is that you always use your private key to sign a message. So that's what's called signing. And you use the public key of the other person to encrypt it. So then the person that you send the message to, in this case Bob, he can go and decrypt it, and he can verify that the message is actually from Alice. And this is the same thing that happens in cryptography. This is the same thing that happens in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrencies, and everywhere. And so what I want to show you now is, I want to really show you a very, 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 very basic example. And here is how this example works. So we have a private key, and a public key, and it's basically the encryption key. And this is always obviously from the person. So Bob says, listen, my encryption key, my public key is 5. So Alice now has this message to Bob. And there's an algorithm. And the algorithm is, convert the letter into a number. And take this number as the message and put it to the power of the public key. And then take it mod 14. And I'll explain you what this means. So what we're going to do, we just use a basic example. And let's say I have the message of B, right? And this is the plain text. So I don't want E for Oscar to understand that my message is B. We just use a super simple example. So I'll put it into the number, and let's use the number 2, right? B for 2. So we don't need to encrypt this. So what we do now is, we take the 2 here to the power of 5 mod 14. And I'll quickly explain you what this means, and I'll give you the result. So 2 to the power of 5 should be still very, very basic math. So that should be 32. Mod 14 means I divide 32 by 14. In this case, it would fit 2 times. 2 times 14 is 28. And what's the remainder is 4. Okay? So 32 mod 14 is 4. If this is too fast for you, we're going to go into modular arithmetic in the next episode. So right now, we're going to cut this really, really short. So the algorithm is, we take the message comes from here, take the letter, put it into a number, and to put it to the power of the public key. The public key is known to everyone. The algorithm is known to everyone. And so now, the ciphertext is 4. So why? 2 to the power of 5 mod 14 is 32 to the power of 5. 32 mod 14. 2 times 14 is 28. The remainder is 4, and the remainder is what you actually are sending to Bob. So what Eve sees, Eve, Oscar, and Bob, they get 4. So 4 doesn't mean much because what they basically see is, in this case they would see D actually, right? So Alice would send Bob D. And no one knows what is this and how does this get to. So now the big question is, how does Bob get to the original message? And this is now where the private key comes in, right? And in private key cryptography, or in asymmetric cryptography, the public key, in this case 5, and the private key are connected through math. It's very, very easy to get from the private key to the public key. It's very, very easy. And we're going to discuss this in later episodes over and over again. But this way, to go from the public key to the private key is impossible. All about asymmetric cryptography works this way. This is a one-way function. It's easy to go from one way to the other. It's impossible to go backwards. So in this case, the public key is 5. No one knows what the private key is. It's the same in Bitcoin. Just because you have the public address, a public key, you cannot go to the private key. It's impossible, or mathematically just not feasible. There's way too many calculations. But this one-way function is very, 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 very simple. And it's essentially that there's a mathematical connection. We're going to keep the superficial on purpose right now, and I'm not going to go too deep into the math. We're going to do this in later episodes. I just want to give you the example on how this works. So now, here is where the private key comes in. And private key only Bob knows. The private key in this example, and I'm not going to explain to you how I'm going to get to the private key right now. This is coming at later episodes, but in this case, it is 11. And now, Bob has to do the exact same function. So Bob goes and takes 4 to the power of 11. So it's the same function. Remember, the function stays the same. Just the key changes, right? Asymmetric cryptography. Mod, and it's the same functions here, mod 14. So now we need to do a lot of math. And this is now where we actually need to do some calculations, right? Because 4 to the power of 11 is not something I can do in my head. So I need to use my calculator. So I'm going 4 to the power of 11. And that is quite a large number. So you can see it, it's 4,194,304. You can try this out yourself. So how do you get from here mod 14? So what you do is you divide it by 14 and you get a number, and you minus this number actually. So the remainder of all this, so if I remove 299,593, right? So wait, let me go backwards to write this down. So 4 to the power of 11 equals, so 4 to the power of 11 equals 4,194,304. So you see already, and we're using really, really small numbers. Imagine once the numbers get larger, no one can do this anymore. So 4 to the power of 11 is this number. And now we need to do mod 14. So first, we divide it by 14. And there's a number that goes 299,593. And then there's a remainder, comma 14, blah, 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 blah. So what we do now is we take this small number behind the period and multiply it times 14. And this is going to give us the actual remainder. And we're going to not go into the math why this works. You just need to take it at the moment on how it is. We're going to go into this in the next episode. Times 14. And so, if you do this, it's actually 2. And so what I do now is 2 equals B. And so Bob knows the original message was B. Now, how does this look for Bob and Oscar? Bob and Oscar says 4, everyone knows 4, to the power of what? Mod 14 equals what? And this is the private key. Now, it is impossible to get from here to just see the message and then get from here to this, because you don't know what your private key is. Now in this case, you could do it with brute force because this is small numbers. 11 is a small number. But when these numbers, they go to 70 digits, it's impossible to back calculate this because there's just so many possibilities. And so what would this look like in traditional cryptography? Well, in traditional cryptography, in Symmetric, I know it's 2 to this way, 2 that way. Here in Asymmetric, we had as a public key 5, we put it into the box, turned it, and then the return was done only with 11. And so obviously what you don't know right now is you don't know how 11 and 5 is connected in RSA, and we're going to go into this, right? And these are examples. I wanted to use a super simple example here that actually is working. I'm going to grab this example in one of the later episodes. And so I hope you didn't completely exit with the math here. I know that there's a lot of math, and this is not going to get better. It's going to get more intense. But this is exactly what this is about, understanding these things in simple terms. If you don't understand the math, then just focus on this kind of drawing here with the lock in having those 3 positions. You have the open and the closed, and you have another closed for the signing. And so this is now where it gets really, really important. So let's talk about advantages of asymmetric cryptography. Well, it's really hard to crack. If it's properly set up, it's almost impossible to hack this and crack this because there's just too many possibilities. Because you make this public key open, only you know the private key, and the connection is impossible to find out. There is this possibility of signing a message, which is basically about the identity. Only asymmetric cryptography allows this. And so what you normally do is, you do first asymmetric cryptography, establish a secure channel, and then you continue with symmetric cryptography afterwards, because there's the secure channel there, and you exchange the key, and it's very easy to do, and you know you're talking to the right person. Right? So this is very, very important. And obviously there's this key thing that there's no need to meet because you have this secure channel. Now you have disadvantages as always, and basically, and you will see, they kind of work together really well with symmetric cryptography. Well, the first one is it's counterintuitive, right? It's really, really not intuitive what we're doing. Why 5 and 11? And these are just really, really basic numbers, right? Why? So this is something we're going to discuss in later episodes. We're actually going to go into this math. The second problem is you cannot really know if it's broken or not. And this is something that is going to be relevant going forward. We don't have a proof. There's no mathematical proof that it's not broken, that it cannot be hacked. And this is difficult. In symmetric cryptography, we can kind of do this quite well because it is so straightforward. In asymmetric, this is huge controversies. And that's a lot. You have this in Bitcoin a lot where people say, well, the NSA set this up and they're just kind of misusing this. And it's very difficult to kind of counter argue against that. And the last one is that it's computation intense. And it is really, really intense. And that's why a lot of these cryptographies kind of work together, especially when it's about speed. That's why when you go on a website, first you use asymmetric cryptography and then you switch over to symmetric cryptography. Obviously the computers all do this by themselves and do this by automatically. But that is really, really simple. When we talk about the different algos, now obviously there's different algorithms that can be used here. We just used something called RSA. Rivest, Shamir, Edelman. There's one that's very, very popular also, which is Diffie-Hellman. 2 L's here. And the one that's very popular in cryptocurrencies is elliptic curve cryptography. Elliptic curve cryptography. And we're going to be talking about all 3 of those in great detail and kind of discuss those and how this works. And this is what we're actually going to be doing in the upcoming episodes. So we're going to discuss about these different algorithms, and then we're going to use this to talk about confidential transactions, ring signatures, going into very, very complex things until Mimblewimble and scriptless scripts. And I'm telling you, if you understand this, you're going to be top notch in cryptography. And I promise you 99.999% of people in cryptocurrencies don't understand these things. And one of the reasons why I've always been so interested in this is because I always know what's really, really important to know and where I need to dig deep and where it's always possible to hire someone else or to let someone else do this. And so here, I really want to know my stuff. I hope this doesn't completely confuse you. We're going to talk about some math in the next episode where it's really about modular arithmetic. So we're going to be discussing how did we actually do this calculation here? What does this modulus mean? How does this actually work? And it's going to lay the foundation to talk about these different algorithms. If you have any questions, then let me know in the comments below. If you love this stuff, please give me a thumbs up so that YouTube kind of ranks this better. And it motivates me to work on this and kind of push out the next episode. If you don't want to miss it, then subscribe, click the little bell button, and I'll see you at the next episode. Yours truly, Julian.